Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Dead Man Walking Podcast. I am your host, Repeatedly Dead Fred, author of the medical trauma memoir, The Summer I Died 20 Times, which is what happened to me. And that's how I got the nickname, Repeatedly Dead Fred. Today, I am here with the fascinating Mubin Shaikh. And some of you might know him from a little story called the Toronto 18, which happened, was that like 2005, 2006? So, probably the most famous terrorist takedown in Canada that I know of, but I believe these sorts of things happen on a fairly regular basis in countries around the world that often don't make the headlines, but you did. So, welcome to the show, and I'm looking forward to hearing more of your story.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for not dying.
I try, and that relates to your new position because you've transitioned. I know transition's not the best word to use these days, but you've changed careers. So you've gone from, if I understand this correctly, a devout Muslim to a radicalized Muslim to a de-radicalized Muslim to essentially a spy and security consultant. Is that sort of the timeline?
Yeah, you can say that. Former extremist turned counterterrorism operative.
Mm-hmm.
It was good times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you were, we'll get more to your de-radicalization because I found you through Chris Buckley. And he's also, you can listen to that episode, guys.
Awesome dude.
That's
Yes.
a crazy story. So,
Yeah. Chris Buckley.
so you were born in Toronto, and I guess to a traditional Muslim family.
Yeah, just very quickly, born and raised in Toronto, Canada, Indian Muslim parents.
Okay.
Um, and so community and culture and religion is calling me one way based on my upbringing and the conditioning that parents kind of put their kids through. And so I
Right.
was being taken to the mosque, very, very early on. Like I'm talking 4 years old, 5 years old, by the ages of 7 and 8, we were already staying over at the mosque. So I was born into this family, a very, religious family and very active in the Canadian Muslim community. So my dad came, so he left India, which is where he's born, and actually went to school and grew up in the UK at the time. So
Mm-hmm.
you're thinking like early 60s, right? Like you have a lot of the British Pakistanis who went to Britain and the whole labor movements. And so my dad basically went to school there, did electronics, and
Mm-hmm.
got Bell Canada, which is a Canadian telecommunications company, had a job fair, basically offered him a job and to set up shop in Canada. And at that time, when he came here in the mid 70s, there was, I think, one Muslim organization in the city of Toronto proper. So my
Mm-hmm.
father comes in that generation, that first generation of first immigrants who set up basically the Muslim community, right? And I was born into that, and I was
Mm-hmm.
the firstborn son in my
Mm-hmm.
dad's family. So all these pressures on me, and so all the community and the cultural stuff was calling me one way. But of course, by daytime, I was in public school, secular public school. And
Mm-hmm.
so that gave me exposure to a whole new kind of understanding and worldview. And this would eventually, this would come to a head due to an identity crisis that was forming. Because by the time I got into high school, I was having fun with, all non-Muslim kids. But
Mm-hmm.
the community, it's like, oh, you got to be like this. But I
Sure.
wanted to be, so this created an identity crisis. And I always laugh. I laugh whenever I recount the story because of how silly it sounds, as
Mm-hmm.
now 48 years old and five kids, married 25 years. Like, but I had a house party while my parents were gone. And unfortunately, my dad, not being an idiot, told his brother to check on the house while he was gone. And unfortunately for me, it was during this house party that my uncle basically burst through the door and I got caught, and it was just a crazy situation. And so
Mhm.
then I would then join a missionary group, Muslim missionary group, and go to India and Pakistan in 1995, the summer of 95, because I got in trouble, I got caught. And so I said, okay, I need to get religious. And then I tried to make this conscious effort to reject the West, the culture that the associations that came with it. This is very common in that radicalization process. People become very, very isolationist and very separationist
Mhm.
from the world around them. And that's the hole that you kind of bring yourself into. And so that's how I became radicalized, right? I decided that
Yeah.
I'm just going to become this hardcore Muslim, and that's how I'm going to live happily ever after. Pro tip for anyone listening: it's not how it works. So basically, I in 1995 I went to India and Pakistan. In Pakistan, I had a chance encounter with the Taliban. I know it sounds weird saying that, but it really was. I wasn't there to seek them out or to specifically train with them, but the areas that we were in, they happened to be present, right? And so this is right before they took over the first time at the in the fall of '95. So I was there
Mhm.
right before all this happened. So when I came back, I saw then on the news that hey, they said they did what they said that they were going to do. And so I became enamored. I became really doubled down on that identity. And so I had a full beard and black turban and long robes.
Mhm.
And that alone doesn't mean you're radicalized, but when you attach it to this isolationist, separationist, hostile ideology, well, then that sudden change in clothing and behavior is a warning sign, is a sign of radicalization. So
Yeah.
just
So
changing clothes is not, but yeah. So that's how I became radicalized.
so your parents were community leaders, but were they political or no? They were just
Good
religious.
question. Very, very good question. I thought of, saying this earlier in my explanation. So most people grow up with politics, their parents discuss it, their families discuss it, whatnot. It just so happened that my father's father was a police officer in India,
Mhm.
and they were not allowed to discuss politics in the home. So while normally Indian Muslims would grow up with discussions on, could be Pakistan because the whole India-Pakistan split, or it will they'll just bring up other issues related to the politics, like Kashmir is the Indian political issue. They did not talk about politics. The grandfather to the kids, my father and their siblings, his siblings, no politics. So I grew up with no politics. Never heard about any wars and grievance narratives that a lot of people grow up with, and that's one of the things that also radicalize people. Ideology and grievances, and the interplay between the two. But no, they were not political, and we did not grow up like that.
So when you don't have a family that discusses these things openly, and then you get hit with them when you're how old were you when you went on your missionary work?
I was 17, or no, I was
17.
18. I was 18, 19. I
Yeah.
was 19. Yeah, because later that year I turned 20.
Yeah. So it's just, mind blown when you've got all this and you don't know how to process it and how to kind of filter out like what's the reality here, what's the good, what's the bad, and which side of the line do I want to be on? Yeah, that could just totally blow you up. So
Pun not intended, I hope.
yeah.
Um, this is something that I came to realize, like in studying that radicalization process and how people get like that and what they do when they get like that and how you get out of it, right? This is kind of that trajectory. And that conflict that we have, our sense of meaning and belonging and identity, this is something that transcends culture, religion, race, ethnicity, nationality, gender, all of it. It is a core human thing that we all go throughout our life. You're not
Hmm.
just that dumb teenage kid who's has no, because again, if you just think physically, the brain is not even developed physically to be able to deal with that stuff. So you're in this crazy state of you do things like on whims and like without thinking the
Hmm.
consequences and all that sort of stuff that comes, later on with more developed cerebral cortex and thinking. But even, think about, we say, having a midlife crisis. I mean, we have the same crisis of meaning and identity and sense of purpose in midlife. And if you talk to people later in their life, I call it the old age crisis. They look back
Hmm.
on their life and, oh, did I live my life like this? And did I and could I have done and should I have? This is something that will be with us, and and people are always seeking ways to get that sense of like, I have purpose, I have this and I have that, and really can explain many times why people do the stupid things that they do, and can also explain why they do the amazing things that they do.
So what happened to your relationship with your family when they found out you had been like they obviously didn't send you on this missionary work to have you end up working with the Taliban and radicalized. And when they found out, how did that go? Not well,
Yeah,
I'm
the
guessing.
yeah, no, it's a good question because yeah, they everybody thought, oh, this guy's he's getting religious now. Okay, great. And I came back, and for a while they saw that I was, but the group that I was with, they don't talk about politics. All right, the
Mhm.
discussion on politics is not permitted, and they're very smart like that because politics will get you into trouble, and because this organization works in different countries, countries are not going to let groups like this operate if they know that they're political groups. So they avoid a lot of the scrutiny that usually comes on religious groups, religious missionary groups, especially Muslim groups, and I'm
Mhm.
talking in the Muslim world, right? Like
Mhm.
Muslim, countries are up, of course, because many of them are, authoritarian, and so they don't. So this group doesn't talk about it, and so because I was I got exposure to the Taliban, and this whole idea of the wars and the fighting that was happening in the world, I kind of fell out of favor slash left that movement because they were not about the politics, and I was all about the politics now. So they saw that initially I was religious and I was praying and I was doing all the things that ritually I was supposed to do, but ideologically,
Mhm.
I was radicalized. I was going off script, and that's when I kind of joined up with another group of people called Salafists, right? Or I mean,
Mhm.
these were more extreme Salafists. I've tempered myself a little bit. I don't paint all Salafists with the same brush. Salafists are basically the I'm trying to be very diplomatic in my
Yeah.
explanation, but you see the traditionally just basic quick Islam 101. After the Prophet, peace be upon him, there you have the Sunni sect, the majority Muslim
Mhm.
body that emerged out of that. And for the vast majority of known Islamic history, Sunni Muslims subscribe to four schools of law. All right, there are four schools of law. And these are just like, where do you hold your hands in prayer? How do you make ablution? Just very ritualistic things. The Salafists, they came later on in the 1800s, so they're relatively recent. And basically, they don't follow the schools of law. They basically say, go back to the early sources yourself. I call that do it yourself Islam. And that is why you will find that the vast majority of terrorists come from that strain, that mentality. All right, that
Mhm.
I'll say that extreme Salafist sect. Right, you don't find it coming from the Sufis, for example. Like, like
Mhm.
Sufi Muslims are like the Jedi of the Muslim world,
Yeah.
and these hyper Salafists are like the Sith. Okay, they use the Force, but one uses it positively, one uses it negatively. So I fell in with the Sith, basically the Muslim Sith version of the Sith. And that became, now it was more than just being political. Now it was being about being hostile, actively hostile. The West is the enemy, and the irony totally lost on me, of course, the hypocrisy of a Muslim in the West talking in a way that he would never be able to talk in the Muslim world, talking about how the West is the enemy, right?
Mhm.
Uh, and so that's the mentality that I kind of stayed in for a while, about 5 years, I guess, testing the waters and seeing how. And then here in Canada, it's not like we have the luxury of being able to do this. We're spoiled in one sense, we can say whatever we want, we can do whatever we want. I'm not saying we're spoiled with too much freedom. I mean, I don't know if that's a thing. Maybe it is,
Mhm.
but I it all came to a head on 9/11, right? When the 9/11 attacks happened, that was that real trigger point for me to really reconsider what I was actually getting into and what I was. So, not to jump ahead in the story there, but I was in this radicalized state, thinking hostile, adversarial towards the West, even this country. And then 9/11 happened. And then I realized that this is bad, right? Like, I understood these foreign wars, but this flying planes into buildings, I must have missed it in my religious teachings, right? Because
Yeah.
this was odd, this was extreme, right? Like fighting the enemy, fighting combatants, everybody has that, right? It's a normal part of human tradition. But this attacking civilians and stuff, this was a problem for me. So I thought to myself, I had this moment of reflection, and I thought, like, what? How is it that I have come to subscribe to this mentality, and this is what it produced in the end, right? And so I realized that I grew up with a cultural version of Islam. I didn't study Arabic. I didn't know what the Quran actually, like, we read translations of the Quran, right?
Mhm.
Because Indians don't speak Arabic. I mean, most Muslims in the world are not Arabs, right? And many Arabs are not Muslims, right? They're Christian,
Mhm.
or otherwise. So we don't learn the language. So I realized that, man, I need to learn the language. I need to realize, like, but I should say, on the other side, I was also thinking, wow, like the great war is coming, you know and I'm going to go to the Muslim world, and I'm going to stage up there. Basically, I'm going to study the religion, but if it just so happens that the great war breaks out, at least I'll be there, and I'll still be able to do something, right, in
Mhm.
over there. And this is the mentality of a lot of people. Sometimes will have these extremist ideas about, and even and misplaced loyalties over there, regarding over there, but here they won't do anything, right? And
Right.
this even includes, like, ISIS members. A lot of them are all about the fighting over there, but they won't do anything here, right? Many of them will. I mean, not saying that. So this was the mentality I had, and then so I would eventually move to Syria, and this was
Okay.
in 2002. Yeah, I'm jumping way ahead, but this is in 2002, before the war has happened, before all that stuff has
Mhm.
gone on.
So I find it interesting that 9/11 had that effect on you that sort of, kicked you back a bit. And going back to Chris Buckley, that's what drew him in.
Yeah.
That was the start of his spiral down to where he ended up with the
Yeah.
KKK.
I can't remember what year he was in Afghanistan.
Um, I don't either, but
Okay. Yeah. No, Chris is it's amazing, because if I can, I'll do a really quick fast forward.
Mhm.
So I'm in Syria. I spent 2 years there. I studied Arabic and Islamic studies. I was introduced to Sufism properly and formally through the Islamic tradition, and came to realize how wrong my views about religion were, about
Mhm.
God, about my purpose in life, and all of that. I had this newfound appreciation for God, awareness, and religion, and also a newfound appreciation for the rights that we have in the West, in Canada in particular. And because of the horror stories I heard in Syria about the dictatorship and so on. And I thought to myself, wow, this so-called kuffar West, we have We make places of worship here, mosques, big mosques. We collect charity money. We have autonomy to just allocate that money and distribute it as we see fit according to our religious rights. And so it was like, this is actually a really good place that's here. And so I resolved when I came back that I would help to defend it. I would protect it, that it would not be assaulted and otherwise taken over, so that my rights were intact. So I came back to Canada. Was the first week that I got back, the first Canadian has been arrested on domestic terrorism charges. Mubin Shaikh was arrested in 2004 in connection with the London fertilizer bomb plot. You can
Mm-hmm.
look that up. It was a year before the subway bombings, of course, underground bombings. Mubin Shaikh sat to the left of me in the Quran school that I went to as a kid. Okay. So I,
Wow.
I called up CSIS, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. And some of you may remember way back in the day of the dinosaurs, they had this thing called phone books. And actually people would put their phone numbers in the book,
Yeah.
and so you had government listings in the back. So I called them up. I said, listen, this is a mistake. I know the family. This can't be. They said to me, look, not a mistake. It's in the courts. It's out of our hands. But the fact that you're calling us about this guy, we want to come and chat with you. So they came, they chatted with me. I talked to them. I told them my life story. They put to me, listen, we would love for you to work for us as an undercover. You tell us who's the good guy, who's the bad guy. I said, yeah, I could do that. I did that for almost 2 years for them. A lot of people, they only knew me because of the Toronto 18 case, because that became a public police investigation. But for almost 2 years before that, I was working with CSIS as an undercover in similar investigations, right? Human network infiltration operations. And then in 2006, all these guys got arrested, became the Toronto 18 case. I spent 4 years as a fact witness in 5 legal hearings, through until 2010. Case was done in 2010. I kind of went public. I was now a free person. Then the war in Syria kicked off in 2011. By
Mm-hmm.
2012, we already started to hear about people wanting to go to join the fight in Syria, joining ISIS. So I went on to social media to counter. Well, I was already on social media watching this stuff happen in real time. Went back in to counter this stuff using my knowledge of religion and counter messaging and all these things. Uh, worked very closely with the U.S. military, assisting in various anti-ISIS activities until about 2018. I had traveled overseas multiple times. I was deeply involved in anti-ISIS activities. Some guys we tracked and some guys got whacked. That's just how it's got to be. But then by around this time, this discussion on de-radicalization started to really take place. People were coming back. They didn't want to be like that anymore. And a colleague of mine, Arno Michaelis, as a former neo-Nazi, it's
Mm-hmm.
Arno. It's like the name Michael with IS at the end, Michaelis.
Mm-hmm.
Arno Michaelis was talking to Chris Buckley, right? And Chris Buckley was actually, Arno brought Chris on a Skype call with me. And him and I had started to have this conversation. It's like, hey, it's like, you want to meet my formerly radicalized Muslim buddy? Telling this Knights of the Georgia Ku Klux Klan military veteran whose brother got killed, battle brother got killed by Muslim extremists. And can you imagine how and so it's just,
A little bit of tension.
I love the story because like I remember looking at him and seeing like the fear and the hate in his eyes, like, and it was amazing. And as you know the story, we ended up being colleagues with each other,
Mm-hmm.
working with Parents for Peace. It's an organization that we do these interventions with radicalized and extremist individuals. They might be in court. Like a great example, Chris and I worked on one of the guys that was arrested in the militia plot to kidnap Governor Whitmer from
Oh,
Michigan.
wow.
Yeah.
Okay. He
And
just
so
made
him
the
and
worst
I,
commercial ever.
yeah, yeah.
Did you
Well,
see
him
that?
and
The commercial she
Governor
made?
that she made. Yeah. Well, You know what? I mean, especially now we're getting into election season, and I'm just inundated with all this U.S. election crap.
Yeah.
And like, I'm just allergic to politics because I take a very religious. My spiritual view is like we believe it's irrelevant who is in power and who are these leaders, and we believe that God is the controller over all, the King of Kings, and all these rulers are just pawns. And even people,
Mhm.
I tell you, I get it, like when people get sucked into politics and all that, but it's tribalism. Politics is
Yeah.
just another form of tribalism, and you're just, honestly, you're just wasting your time, your money, your effort. Not saying be apathetic and
Mhm.
negligent, like be involved, still be, I mean, there's only one thing they need from you, and that's the vote, right? So like, kind of
Mhm.
be aware of that. But but yeah, when Governor Whitmer's thing was, when it was happening at that time, and we were just monitoring what was happening in the media with her and all that, it was like, some things we just couldn't say. But I have not seen her ad, and I'm sure it's stellar.
It's got an animated potato that she's having a conversation with.
Oh God, oh God. Yeah. So so I just want to loop, just kind of tie that whole thing off. 2018, this counter radicalization, de-radicalization, and just assisting others kind of with that, with their journey, out of that whole thing, and like raising awareness, right? Like I think when we were kind of doing our pre-chat, we were just
Mhm.
gonna hit the ground running, come in, have a conversation.
Mhm.
There was no strategizing before that. But it was that the word resilience that I saw that really jumped out for me, that when I was thinking about how are we going to talk and what am I going to say, um I like that theme of resilience, right? That
Mhm.
everyone has gone through, yourself. I mean, my God, like I've never even heard of somebody, I thought my story was cool, and it is, but
It
yours is
is.
pretty
It's a
cool
great
too,
story.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but yours is pretty cool too. Like, so if you just think about resilience, right? And for those who are listening, and just like that takeaway of, it's like, I had this quote that I developed, and it was like, only from the clanging of swords does metal, metal, become metal, mettle, right?
Mhm.
Wherewithal, toughness. You have to get hit. You have to be broken. You have to feel that inside you, that turmoil, that grief, that all that stuff that makes you feel uncomfortable and bad. And you have to feel that. If you're not feeling that, something is wrong. Something is very wrong. Now, don't stay in that state, right? Use that state, right? And see what you can do with that. And you'd be surprised what you
Mhm.
can do for yourself and with yourself, whatever your situation is, whatever's happening, right? And so it's one thing that I'm happy now. Like, I'm 48, you know what I mean? I'm getting there. I just celebrated my 25th year anniversary, wedding anniversary. Like, and now I'm kind of at a place where like I feel validated that, in one sense, it was like I realized how people are always kind of gaslighting you and,
Mhm.
undermining you and dismissing what you're going through. And it's true. People do that, right? Like, it could be happening, like, people will do that, right? No matter what. And I'm lucky because I got this new job. I've moved into emergency management. Everything is calmer, cooler,
Mhm.
not as high tempo. And now I have this luxury of looking back and saying, you know what, I was actually right in the way that I persevered and I stuck to it and kept going. And yeah, everybody was always talking and people are always saying all these things, but I stayed on track. I'll give a last example. When the court case came up, and now I was scrutinized to the nth degree
This is the
in
Toronto
court.
18.
This is the Toronto 18, the
Okay.
five different legal hearings that took place. Youth preliminary hearings, adult preliminary hearings, a youth trial by judge only, an abuse of process motion where they try the entrapment argument, which
Mhm.
failed miserably, of course. and then finally a trial by jury of the 3 remaining suspects. So I went through the entire spectrum of legal hearings that that could occur in this sort of legal context, right? And all eyes are on me. Nobody is helping me. Everybody is waiting for me to fall. When the adult, I'll never forget this as long as I live. 2007, 14 adult offenders are coming up for a preliminary hearing. There are 2 lawyers per individual, per suspect, accused. All right, 28 lawyers in that room, and every one of them waiting to bite their pound of flesh from me and make their careers and whatever it was. And I stuck to it. The truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God. So help me Allah. Okay. And I felt good after, because they all failed in the end, right? And because I
Mhm.
stuck to my truth, right? And so just on the resilience point, um, stick to your truth.
Mhm. I think, and usually when I'm the guest on the podcast, resilience comes up, and I say, I think we've all got a resilience gene, and it's more like a muscle. And the more you use it, the more resilient you can become.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Um, I think the starting place of our resilience genes is different for everybody. My parents went through a lot of hard times, so I think I got a firsthand, even if I didn't understand it, injection by osmosis of what resilience is, and I think that's
Mm-hmm.
helped me incredibly. Can I go back to going to Syria for a sec? Like, one of the things Chris told me is most of the people he seemed to meet, and I'm paraphrasing here, um, through the KKK was they were like, maybe the lowlifes of society isn't the best word, but these were people that were really down on their luck and drunks or alcoholics or couldn't find work. Did you find the same thing with the people that were being radicalized? And knowing the way the world is right now, uh, Syria seems like the most unlikely place to go to get de-radicalized.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to look at the context in which these individuals are emerging. So if you're dealing with, let's say rural Georgia, you can imagine the kinds of issues that are there, right? There's poverty, there's like, education, lack of education, access to education. So there are those, you have to look at the internal dynamics, obviously, and the local dynamics of what's happening. Um, there are many factors to consider as to why people, kind of go through this. Maybe he made this comment, and this is a well-known proverb or quote, but hurt people,
Yeah.
right? So there's also that part of it. Um, you have to look at multiple angles, or from multiple angles. Very crash course on radicalization. Here's a quote: ideology without grievances doesn't appeal to the mind, doesn't make sense. Ideology without grievances doesn't resonate, and grievances without ideology are not acted upon. Grievances without ideology are not acted upon, meaning that ideology are action enabling ideas. Okay, it's not just a set of views and set of beliefs that you hold. Action enabling ideas. That's the interplay between ideology and grievances. For example, I always do you like, okay, America in the Middle East. That's why terrorism exists in the Middle East. Do you think if the US was to leave tomorrow, that suddenly those terrorists who are over there are suddenly going to start playing nice with everyone? I doubt it. So there's a limit to grievances and there's a limit to ideology. Here's another quote. Sometimes ideology is a driver of terrorism or violent extremism, but at other times it's just a passenger with other psychosocial factors at the wheel. So that's what
Yeah.
we want to look at, those other psychosocial factors. So there are many things that could come to bear at any given moment. You can have 2 brothers from the same family. One will become a terrorist and the other one will become a counter-terrorist. Will be in the
Mhm.
military. This is a real example I'm using. He will be in the military fighting and killing terrorists, and his brother will be on the opposite side.
Mhm.
So, it's those are the kinds of people that I saw from all different walks of life, all backgrounds, all histories, right?
Mhm. So, how did you end up in Syria, be de-radicalized? We've got about 2 minutes left.
Yeah, you're asking the right questions. I'll keep it. So I was thinking about going to different countries at the time, Saudi Arabia, Egypt. I was too old to go to Saudi because I was around 25, and that's when the
Mhm.
brain stops, changing, right? And they don't want you when your brain is already solidified. They want you when it's still malleable. Tried looking into Egypt, was too expensive at the time. Just so happened that the mosque that I was in, there was some construction workers there. There were two brothers. One of them they were both from Syria, and they heard that I wanted to go and study, and they offered. They said, "Hey, I have a house in Syria, small house. Why don't you go and live there? My sister and her family lives there. They'll help you and hook you up." And so I went to Syria, and that's how I ended up in
Amazing.
Syria. But in 2002, it was not the crap show that it is now. It was still a dictatorship, but it was very safe. And that's the thing about dictatorships: like nobody's going to steal a car or rob you or rape you, because they will torture you if they pick you up, right? So very
Mhm.
very safe, but God help you if you said anything against the government. God can't even help you, right? Like,
Mhm.
they just wreck you. And so that's how I ended up in Syria.
Well, Mr. Sheikh, this has been fascinating.
Hmm.
I can't thank you enough for coming on, and I wish you much success in your new career. Um, did you ever feel threatened?
Oh yeah, there were times where, for a while I was dead man walking, right? But by the grace of God and
Yeah,
friends in good places and people who are ready to roll out when we need to, no problem.
amazing. You should have many blessings upon you. To
Thank you. You too.
to
You and yours
my
as well.
Thank you. To the audience, thank you for tuning into the Dead Man Walking podcast. Please like, subscribe, um, share this video, talk about this amazing story. Oh, I forgot to ask. Hopefully, if people want to get a hold of you for something, where do they go?
I got off of social media. I got no time for it anymore. I'm very
Okay.
busy, but just I am on LinkedIn, but you can always email me, MubinShaikh